October 12, 1997, Cedar Ridge, Ohio. The kind of small American town where everybody waved at each other at red lights. That Sunday night, a cold autumn rain drummed steadily against the rooftops, turning the streets slick and shining under yellow street lamps. Inside a modest two-story house on Maple Drive, Laura Mitchell stood in front of the hallway mirror, pressing her fingers gently against her temples. The migraines had been getting worse, sharper, longer, unpredictable. She tried to smile when 10-year-old Daniel peeked around the corner, clutching his comic book. "I'll be back before you wake up, buddy," she told him softly, grabbing her purse from the kitchen counter. Her voice carried reassurance, but her eyes looked tired, not just physically, but like something had been weighing on her for weeks. At 8:47 p.m., she pulled into St. Vincent's hospital parking lot. Security footage later showed her stepping out of her blue Ford Taurus, pausing briefly as rain misted around her. She looked up at the hospital building, tall, square, fluorescent lights glowing through rows of windows. For a second, she hesitated. Then she locked the car and walked toward the sliding glass entrance doors. The timestamp captured her pushing wet hair from her face before disappearing inside. Inside, the lobby was quiet. A night nurse at the front desk would later recall Laura signing in for a neurological evaluation. Nothing urgent. No ambulance. No visible distress. Just another patient seeking relief from pain. She took a clipboard, filled out forms neatly in blue ink, and sat down beneath a flickering television playing late-night news. Witnesses remembered her rubbing her temples again, and glancing down the hallway toward the elevators as if she expected someone. At 9:12 p.m., badge records show she was escorted to sublevel B for testing. That was the last confirmed time her identity was officially logged. After that, the hospital's internal tracking system showed nothing. No discharge. No transfer. No billing beyond initial intake. Just a digital silence that investigators would later describe as unusually clean. Meanwhile, outside, the rain intensified, washing the parking lot in sheets of water as her car remained untouched. Back at home, Daniel fell asleep on the couch waiting for headlights to flash across the living room window. The porch light was left on, a habit Laura always insisted on when one of them came home late. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. Across town, hospital staff changes were recorded. Elevators logged movement between floors. But there was no record, no camera footage, no witness statement of Laura Mitchell ever walking back through those glass doors. By sunrise the next morning, Cedar Ridge police had already taped off Laura Mitchell's blue Ford Taurus in the hospital parking lot. The car doors were locked. Her purse was gone, meaning she had taken it inside, but her winter coat was still folded neatly in the back seat. Detectives noted there were no signs of struggle around the vehicle. No broken glass. No drag marks. Just rainwater pooled along the asphalt, washing away anything that might have been left behind overnight. Inside St. Vincent's, hospital administrators appeared cooperative, at least at first. They provided intake forms with Laura's signature and confirmed she had been admitted for neurological testing. But when investigators requested hallway footage from between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., they were told the surveillance system had experienced a temporary outage. 3 full hours of missing video. Strangely, footage before and after that window played perfectly fine. Technicians claimed a lightning surge from the storm had corrupted the files, though no other systems in the building were affected that night. Detectives interviewed nurses, janitors, on-call physicians, anyone working that shift. Most claimed they didn't remember Laura specifically. One orderly thought he might have seen her near the elevator, but he wasn't certain. Another staff member quietly told police that sublevel B had been under maintenance for months, even though badge logs showed activity there the night Laura vanished. The more investigators pressed, the more inconsistent the timelines became. Shift reports were revised. Logs were corrected. It felt less like confusion and more like quiet coordination. At home, Daniel stayed with his aunt while officers searched the Mitchell house from top to bottom. They dusted for fingerprints, scanned for signs of forced entry, and combed through Laura's financial records. There were no unusual withdrawals. No plane tickets. No packed luggage. Her calendar still had Daniel's school play circled in red for the following week. Friends and co-workers described her as stable, devoted, and deeply protective of her son. The theory that she had simply walked away from her life didn't sit right with anyone who knew her. Weeks turned into months. Search dogs traced her scent only as far as the hospital's lower-level exit doors, and then nothing. No trail leading into the woods. No indication she left on foot. Rumors began circulating through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. Secret affairs, nervous breakdowns, witness relocation. But behind closed doors, some detectives started whispering something else entirely. That whatever happened to Laura Mitchell didn't happen outside that hospital. It happened inside. Daniel Mitchell grew up with absence, sitting at the dinner table every night. Birthdays felt incomplete. Holidays felt staged. Every year on October 12th, he would stare out the living room window long after dark, half expecting headlights to sweep across the lawn. Teachers described him as quiet but observant, the kind of kid who noticed things others didn't. While other children eventually stopped asking about his mother, Daniel never did. He collected newspaper clippings about her disappearance and kept them in a showbox beneath his bed, reading them over and over like they might rearrange themselves into answers. By the time he graduated high school, Daniel had memorized every detail of the official case file. He knew the timeline down to the minute. He knew which detective first responded to the scene, which nurse signed the intake form, and which security contractor maintained the hospital cameras in 1997. What bothered him most wasn't what was written, it was what wasn't. The missing footage. The inconsistent staff statements. The unexplained badge logs in sublevel B. It felt less like a mystery and more like something deliberately unfinished. In college, Daniel chose structural engineering, not because he loved buildings, but because he wanted to understand them. Blueprints. Hidden load-bearing walls. Service tunnels. Dead space between floors. He learned that older hospitals often contained forgotten mechanical levels, sealed corridors, abandoned storage units no longer listed in updated architectural records. The idea unsettled him, that entire rooms could exist without appearing on public plans. Rooms people walked above every day without knowing. In 2011, during a late-night study session in his Chicago apartment, Daniel decided to file a formal public records request for St. Vincent's original architectural drawings. Weeks passed without response. Then months. Finally, a partial set of blueprints arrived, heavily redacted, stamped revised 1999. But something caught his eye immediately. The spacing between sublevel B and the foundation slab didn't make structural sense. There was a measurement gap, too large to be explained by insulation or wiring channels. It looked like an entire floor had been erased from the layout. Then, one afternoon, a thick manila envelope appeared outside his apartment door with no return address. Inside was a faded copy of the hospital's 1996 construction diagram, unredacted. Certain sections were circled in black ink. Beneath sublevel B, there was a rectangular outline labeled simply, restricted mechanical. No elevator access marked. No stairwell indicated. Just empty space drawn into existence. And at the bottom of the page, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. They never closed it. In the summer of 2011, St. Vincent's Hospital announced a full-scale renovation project. Local news called it modernization, new surgical wings, updated imaging labs, expanded emergency rooms. But when Daniel saw the headline, he didn't think about progress. He thought about opportunity. Renovations meant walls coming down. Ceilings exposed. Old infrastructure revealed. If there had ever been something hidden beneath that building, this was the first real chance in 14 years that it might be uncovered. Daniel drove back to Cedar Ridge the following week. The hospital looked the same from the outside. Sterile, controlled, respectable. But inside, it was chaos. Plastic sheets hung from ceilings. The smell of sawdust and concrete dust filled the air. Construction crews moved through the corridors in hard hats, tearing apart sections of sublevel B. Daniel wore a borrowed safety vest and carried a clipboard, blending into the background like he belonged there. No one questioned him. In places like that, confidence was better than credentials. When he reached the lower level, he felt it immediately, a subtle shift in temperature, colder than the floors above. The hallway lights flickered intermittently, some already disconnected. The section under renovation was partially gutted, revealing older concrete beneath layers of remodeling from decades past. As workers demolished a storage room wall, Daniel noticed something unusual behind the debris, a seam in the concrete that didn't align with the visible structure. It wasn't part of the renovation plan pinned to the nearby board. Later that afternoon, after most of the crew had cleared out, Daniel returned to that same corner. The plastic barrier had been left half open. He stepped through quietly, his boots crunching against broken tile. There it was, partially concealed behind a fresh sheet of drywall someone had installed years ago. A metal door embedded directly into raw concrete. No signage. No handle. Just a flat industrial surface painted the same dull gray as the surrounding wall. If you weren't looking for it, you'd walk right past it. What made his pulse quicken wasn't just the door, it was the floor beneath it. The tiles stopped abruptly 2 feet before the frame, revealing older, unpolished cement. It didn't match the rest of sublevel B. Daniel crouched, brushing dust aside with his hand. The edge of the concrete formed a clean rectangle, like the top of a sealed opening. And faintly, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right, was a worn biohazard symbol scratched into the metal, as if someone had tried to remove it, but couldn't quite erase the warning completely. Daniel waited until nearly midnight before coming back. The construction site was silent now, the usual echo of machinery replaced by a heavy, unnatural stillness. The only light in sublevel B came from a single emergency bulb casting a dull orange glow across the corridor. He stood in front of the metal door for a long moment, listening, not just for footsteps, but for anything. A hum. A whisper of ventilation. A sign that something on the other side was still alive. He wedged a pry bar into the seam and pushed. At first, nothing happened. The door felt sealed shut, like it hadn't moved in years. But with steady pressure and a sharp metallic crack, the lock gave way. The sound echoed down the unfinished hallway, making him freeze. When the door finally shifted open a few inches, a rush of stale, cold air spilled out, air that hadn't circulated in a very long time. It smelled like concrete dust, old wiring, and something faintly medicinal beneath it. Daniel slipped inside and aimed his flashlight down the corridor. The beam revealed a narrow passageway lined with exposed pipes along the ceiling. The walls were unfinished cement, but not abandoned. This space had been built with purpose. Faded directional arrows were stenciled along the walls, barely visible under layers of grime. Overhead, a row of fluorescent fixtures flickered weakly, some still drawing power from somewhere. That meant this place hadn't been entirely disconnected. Small rooms branched off both sides of the hallway. Each one had a reinforced metal door with a narrow observation window made of thick glass. Daniel approached the first window and wiped away dust with his sleeve. Inside was a hospital bed bolted to the floor. Leather restraints hung from its sides, cracked with age. In another room, he saw monitoring equipment, heart rate machines from the 90s, wires tangled like they'd been left in a hurry. Clipboards still sat on counters, their paper yellowed but intact. Then he reached the room marked 3B. The door creaked open with resistance. His flashlight beam trembled slightly as it moved across the space. The room looked different from the others, less clinical, almost personal. On the bedside table sat a small silver locket. It caught the light instantly, reflecting a sharp glint back at him. Daniel stepped closer, heart pounding hard enough to feel in his throat. He recognized the delicate engraving on its surface before he even picked it up. His mother had worn it every day of his childhood. And when he opened it, the tiny photograph inside stared back at him, a picture of him at 6 years old, smiling with a missing front tooth. Daniel stood frozen in room 3B, the locket still clutched tightly in his hand. The silence around him felt heavier now, no longer empty, but watchful. His flashlight beam shifted toward the far corner of the room where a metal filing cabinet stood against the wall. It was older than the rest of the equipment, its surface rusted along the edges, one drawer slightly misaligned. Unlike everything else covered in thick dust, the handle looked cleaner, as if it had been touched more recently. He stepped closer, each footstep echoing softly against the concrete floor. The top drawer was locked. So was the second. He pulled harder, metal grinding against metal, until the weakened lock snapped with a sharp crack that made him flinch. Inside were rows of manila folders arranged with unsettling precision. No patient wristbands. No hospital ID numbers. Just typed labels marked with coded initials and dates. His hands moved slowly through the files, heart racing faster with each page he flipped. The first few folders detailed something called cognitive response trials. Subjects admitted for chronic neurological pain, primarily migraines and seizure-related symptoms. The language was clinical, detached. References to sensory deprivation chambers. Isolation therapy. Extended compliance observation. There were handwritten notes in the margins, not from nurses, but from someone identified only as lead overseer. Several pages mentioned behavioral resistance and the need for increased containment measures. Then he found it. Mitchell, Laura, admitted, October 12, 1997, 9:12 p.m. The ink looked darker than the rest, as if someone had rewritten the name later. The intake notes described her symptoms exactly as she'd told Daniel that night. worsening migraines, light sensitivity, disorientation. But beneath the official summary, there were additional entries marked restricted. One line read, "Subject displays heightened neural response. Candidate suitable for Phase 2. Another page documented her refusal to sign extended consent forms. The final handwritten note chilled him completely. Non-compliant. Transfer below authorized. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He flipped through the rest of the file frantically. There was no discharge form. No time of death statement. No signature from an attending physician. The last page was a grainy black and white photograph clipped to the back, taken inside what looked like a concrete room. A woman sat in a chair, her face partially turned away from the camera, hair falling over one side. But Daniel didn't need to see her face fully. He recognized the curve of her jaw, the shape of her hands, and scratched faintly in the corner of the photo, barely visible unless tilted toward the light, were two words. Level C. Daniel stared at the words Level C for a long moment, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. According to every official blueprint, there was no Level C. Sublevel B was supposed to be the lowest point of the hospital's foundation. But the file didn't read like a theory, it read like documentation. Precise. Intentional. Real. His flashlight beam drifted toward the far end of the corridor, where the concrete hallway narrowed into shadow. That's when he noticed it, a faint draft brushing against his face, colder than the rest of the underground air. He followed it slowly. At the end of the hall, partially hidden behind a support column, was something that didn't match the architecture above, a narrow steel staircase descending further into darkness. No signage. No safety rail markings. Just raw metal steps leading down into a space that wasn't supposed to exist. The air grew heavier with each step, thinner somehow, as if the oxygen itself didn't want to settle there. His footsteps echoed in a hollow, delayed rhythm that suggested the chamber below was larger than expected. At the bottom, he found a reinforced steel door. Unlike the others upstairs, this one had no rust, no visible age. It looked maintained. The handle wasn't locked. That detail alone made his stomach tighten. He hesitated only a second before pushing it open. The room beyond was small and circular, poured entirely in concrete. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead, buzzing faintly. In the center sat a wooden chair bolted directly into the floor. Leather straps hung from its arms, newer than the ones upstairs. The walls were scarred with deep scratches, layered over one another like desperate attempts at carving through stone. Daniel stepped closer, raising the flashlight to the nearest wall. That's when he saw the writing, carved over and over again, in uneven lines that spiraled outward across the concrete. "Daniel, I'm here. Daniel, I'm here. Daniel, I'm here." The handwriting wasn't random. It wasn't frantic nonsense. It was looping. Careful. Familiar. The same rounded D. The same slanted I'm she used to write in birthday cards. His breath caught in his throat as the fluorescent light above him flickered harder, buzzing louder, until the entire room pulsed in brief flashes of white. And then he heard it. A metallic clang from the staircase behind him. Slow. Measured. Like a door being shut with deliberate force. Daniel turned sharply, heart hammering in his chest, just as the heavy steel door began to swing inward on its own, cutting off the faint glow from the hallway above. As the gap narrowed, his flashlight beam caught something in the far corner of the chamber he hadn't noticed before. A ventilation grate. Its screws freshly loosened. And from somewhere deep within the dark shaft beyond it, a faint, uneven breathing sound. Daniel didn't move. The breathing from inside the vent wasn't loud, but it was real. Slow. Fragile. Human. His flashlight trembled as he stepped closer, kneeling in front of the grate. "Mom," he whispered, the word barely leaving his throat. For a second, there was nothing. Then, 3 soft knocks echoed from deep inside the ventilation shaft. Not random. Not mechanical. Intentional. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. He reached forward, fingers brushing the cold metal of the grate, and that's when the lights above him suddenly shut off, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. In the pitch-black silence, he heard something else. Footsteps. Not from the vent. From the staircase behind him. Slow. Controlled. Descending. A voice finally broke the darkness. Calm. Male. Clinical. You were never supposed to find this level. The next morning, construction crews arrived to find sublevel B sealed off entirely. The section under renovation had been declared structurally unsafe overnight. Access permanently restricted. Security increased. No record of Daniel Mitchell signing in the previous evening. And Daniel, he was reported missing 3 days later. But every October 12th, residents near the empty hospital lot say they hear something strange beneath the ground. 3 knocks. A pause. Then 3 more. As if someone is still down there, waiting to be found. Face screaming in fear.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.